Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is Wednesday. We are still in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we have the privilege today to talk about dying.
I thought you were going to say you were privileged to have us
Yes,
on
I am
the
privileged.
podcast.
I am privileged to have Sheryl Daughety and Alyssa Bream today. For y'all get some horrible topics
Yes.
together.
Why do you think Ecclesiastes is horrible?
I should know just the whole death thing that we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
I should know when y'all are sitting here that something weird is going to come up.
It's less awkward than some of our other conversations.
This is
Yes,
true.
way less awkward.
Mm-hmm.
At least if you die, you ain't got to talk about some of those other things. It says, a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you were born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. That's a weird verse.
Mm-hmm.
After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. And then later it talks about, remember that nothing in life is certain in life. I have seen everything its meaning in life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So the question I want us to examine today is how much, he said it's good to think about dying. How much should we think about dying? Do you all ever think about dying? And why is it good?
So to answer the first question, yes, I think about dying often. And I don't really mean it in a morbid way. I just feel like I was born with this sense of understanding that life is pretty fragile, and that my life, in the scheme of things, I'm going to do what God's put me here to do, but the world doesn't revolve around me, know. And I kind of think of some things in terms of, like, is this going to be something just for my enjoyment, or is this something that's going to live beyond me? I mean, I think when I think about death, I think about it in that way. Not so much in a fearful way, but in a realistic,
right?
Like how's this going to look when I die? Just thinking about decisions you make that could affect other people, I think.
There was a podcast that I can't remember what publication put it out, but it was like How to Be Happy. So I listened through this series of maybe 7 episodes, and one of them was thinking about death, and that was how to be happy. And one of the ways that Buddhists actually think about death is they do these like meditations on death that are very like graphic in the sense of like what happens to your physical body after you die. And like, I have not listened to one because they like have warnings on them, and I'm like, I'm good. I don't need to like be going down that intrusive thought path. But I think that death is good to think about in a lot of ways, because it helps us realize that what we have is fleeting, and that you just need to sometimes just enjoy it. Just look around and like take a breath and be like, you know what? This is the one life I have, and I'm going to do everything I can to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think different people think about it different ways. So I remember the first time sitting in a funeral thinking about what mine's going to be like. I was in my 40s. I went to an uncle's mother's funeral, and I was the only family member there because everybody else was way away, and I could get there. So I went, and I just was sitting there thinking, I wonder what are they going to say about me at my funeral? What is my funeral going to be like?
I don't care.
Yeah. I just remember thinking about those things. It was the first time I'd ever really thought about it. Now, when there's a few things I know, unless some miracle happens, I have less time to live than I have already lived, and so what is it? I'm not really as concerned about what people are going to say at my funeral as I am about, what's going to outlive me, But I think in terms of, okay, I have this much time and I know it's coming to an end. what can I do to leave a mark, make a difference before that time's up. Other people think about dying in different ways. So while people are listening to this, not while we're recording, while people are listening to this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, please don't be talking about dying on the way to Israel.
6 of our staff are in Israel. We're in Israel by the time they're listening to this. And Jay said, what would happen if we all died? Like there was a terrorist
Me and
attack.
Wendy would be in a mess.
Cheryl's preaching every
No,
Sunday.
she's not.
You ain't got to pray at the end. Somebody else can go do that.
I'm happy to pray,
preach.
not teach, not preach. Teach, yes. Preach, no.
You gotta. You can. I don't pray. I'm gonna turn it over to somebody else. But here's your sermon.
There you go.
But so I don't think in those terms. Like I don't think, am I gonna die on this trip? Is my airplane gonna crash? Is my car? I don't think those. That's not how I think.
You don't think it even a single time while you're on the plane?
No, I don't. It doesn't cross my mind.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it just
our minds work very differently.
Yeah, it just doesn't cross my mind.
Do you remember when we were on a flight back? I think it was back from Argentina, and the plane dropped like 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you think you might die? Because I kind of thought we might die.
Wendy and I and my family were on a flight that, we
one
were
time
like, ooh, she said that's pretty much the worst turbulence I've ever been through.
I was on a plane and the plane lost cabin pressure.
Mm.
And that was, and I was in Venezuela and everything was in Spanish. And I did not know what they were saying. Mm-hmm. I knew what was happening.
Like, what did he just say?
I knew exactly what was happening. But everybody on the plane, and if you're not watching, they were doing the Father, right. Son, Holy Spirit. I mean, people were freaking out. And I was afraid that day. I was like, we may die, and I hadn't talked to my wife, because she wasn't with me on the trip. And it was just but in general, like, that's not how I think. I don't think I'm going to die. Like I assume if I get on a plane, I'm going to be fine. But I'm also a fairly mortality kind of person. If I live life expectancy, I've got about 20 to 25 more years left, which is less than half of what I've already lived. Mm-hmm. What am I going to do in that last piece of my life that's going to make a difference? Is it worthwhile? I do think, back to yesterday's conversation, if the only thoughts we ever have are how can I enjoy myself today and live for today and get more today, and we don't think about, what's the difference I'm going to make long after I'm gone, I think we're wasting a life, and I'm not sure. The phrasing here, and I know some of it's the New Living Translation, the way he says it, but he says a wise person thinks a lot about death. Do you think it's like the death that they're thinking about, or just the shortness or the brevity of life and what needs to be done in that short period of time? Is that what he's talking about?
I think the answer is probably yes. It's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, you've probably met a person or some people who just seem to live their life like in total oblivion of the fact that it's ever going to be over. And
they think they're never going to die or get old.
They're invincible. Mm-hmm. And it seems like those type of people typically aren't great decision makers. Right?
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I'm not talking about just safety-wise. I just mean like decision making in general.
This is a dangerous question to ask, so I'll answer it first. Is there anybody you're afraid of dying? So, like, both of Barbara's parents are passed away. Mm-hmm. And for me, so both of her parents are passed away. My kid's mother, her parents were passed away when I met her. They died 9 months apart when she was like 12 years old.
Oh my goodness!
Both heart attacks, I am fairly insulated from close death in my life. My grandparents died when they were older. They were well, my grandfather died when I was like 1, so I didn't have to deal with it. But my other grandfather and my 2 grandmothers were past life expectancy when they died, so you expect it. My parents now are in that life expectancy range, so I expect it. I know it's coming. It's it's very, very close. I worry about like my grandkids dying.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing at
You mean
my
before
age
you
right
do?
now. Yeah, right now.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
the thing that
Yeah.
was heavy on my heart. I don't know what I would do.
I think anything out of the natural order of death.
Yeah.
You expect the older people in your life to die, but you don't expect the younger ones
Mhm.
to die. That's what I think. I think most people, if they were to think about that, would be like, yeah, that's what would be really hard. There was somebody on TikTok who they had 2 children who were terminally ill with the same genetic disease, and watching them go through that process, and then watching how one of their children died and how they mourned that, and then the second child died a few months
Mhm.
later, and they were like, I thought I had more time with them.
Yeah, well, we have a gentleman in the church
Who experienced that
who
same
had
thing.
that
Right.
very same thing, and the children had a genetic,
Right.
and they didn't realize the second one had it. The first one did, and we watched the
Yep.
second one.
I wasn't here for that, but
and they both died.
I've heard
Yeah.
bits and pieces of it.
It's horrifying.
Right.
And it's hard. It's hard to watch.
Mhm.
It's hard from the outside, and I have so little invested to watch.
Mhm.
The hardest funeral I have ever done in my life was to a casket that size.
Yeah. Mhm.
You could have picked up and held in your hands. And the parents, the baby was just a few days old, and
Mhm.
that outside of that natural order, and those are you asked me, you thought it was strange that I don't think about dying on an airplane, but if it ever crosses my mind, like there are moments like when my grandkids are doing something or somewhere that literally it'll make me shudder to think about. Gosh, what if something happened to me? I just don't know what I would do. Do you have those experiences, Sheryl?
I mean, so I have one daughter who's 17 and then a son who's 14. He'll start driving, before too long. And I feel like how I've kind of approached that with my kids, and especially with her when she started driving and wanting to go places and drive farther alone, sometimes at night, is that, of course, I want to teach my kids to make wise decisions for themselves, but at the same time, I don't want them to constantly be in fear, and because I don't want them to live that way. And so I feel like I have to do the same thing when they're in a situation where she's driving a few hours away in unfamiliar territory. I mean, I literally just pray about it, and then I just have to let it go and say, okay, well, I'm not going to stop her from doing it because I don't want her to sit around and live in fear and not experience good things in life. But, at the same time, I feel like I just have to give it over to God and say, it's out of my control. It's out of my hands. I just have to trust her to you.
What advice would you give to somebody to encourage them to be a little bit more conscious about the brevity of life?
I know it might sound like a kind of corny thing to say, but I really do feel, and we talked about this in the last podcast, I really do feel like it makes such a difference to stop and enjoy your life every day, even if it's in really small ways. A lot of that for me is spending time with family, being outside. But if I don't take time to enjoy those things and think about the need to do that and the gift that God's given us to be able to do those things and the shortness of the life that we have, if we just keep our heads down all the time and keep moving forward, I feel like you can even lose sight of that. You can lose sight of what a small amount of time you actually have here and what it means to live a good, full, joyful life.
There's something about that first line that a funeral is better than a party, that in the commentary, the way they kind of spell it out was good, that I would like to read.
Mm-hmm.
It says, inner character is more crucial than outer fragrance, so the lesson derived from a funeral are more instructive than the lessons of a birthday party. The funeral may bring us to think about life, but the party will probably not. In this sense, sorrow is good for the heart. It enables our most inner thoughts to make true evaluations.
And the one thing I would say about a funeral is you suddenly realize that everything you've done in the previous 75 years is going to get summed up in about 20 minutes.
And they're probably going to lie about the bad things anyway.
Or they're going to 2 Chronicles and not talk about it. Yeah.
Right. Just skip over it.
Skip over. And you should. For the most part.
Modern America is very insulated from death. So this is probably weirder for us to talk about than it would have been for them when a body would die. They would be the ones preparing it. You didn't send it to a funeral home. Mm-hmm. There would be you would have the process with
and
that.
It was a long
body.
Period of time.
Right. There was mourning, sitting Shiva, like Jews still do in modern America. I think we've insulated ourselves from death so much because it's uncomfortable. But to be uncomfortable at times leads to a fuller life in some ways.
Well, thank you for joining us again today on One Single Story. We hope you will be back tomorrow as we continue conversation about Ecclesiastes.